Margaret shattered my heart before she broke federal law. You don't mess with a man's family legacy and expect to walk away unscathed. That morning, she stood in my gravel driveway, heels clicking like gunshots against stone that's been here since before her whole subdivision was even a blueprint, waving a $2,500 fine for unauthorized hunting on land my grandfather carved out in 1952. She actually had the gall to tell me that our 70-year-old family tradition didn't align with the modern community standards of her HOA. An HOA, mind you, that had been quietly siphoning money from neighbors for 4 years. But what Margaret didn't realize, what none of these clipboard tyrants ever seemed to get, is that some of us actually read the fine print. And her pristinely curated little empire, it was built on sand. One legal challenge would bring it crumbling down. By the time I was finished with her, Margaret Whitmore would understand the difference between real authority and the kind of power you get from bullying people with bylaws and passive-aggressive smiles. So go ahead, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because you're about to see exactly what happens when a California real estate queen picks a fight with 3 generations of Colorado stubborn. But first, let me rewind and show you how it all began. My name's Jake Morrison, Colorado born and bred. 3rd-generation rancher, though these days I make my living running heavy equipment for the county. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the bills paid and my hands honest. The land, 40 acres of Colorado heaven, came to me 2 years ago after Grandpa passed. 40 acres of pasture that rolls like green waves toward the Rockies. There's an old hunting cabin, a barn that's seen more decades than good repairs, and the kind of peace you don't find in towns. That cabin, it's nothing fancy. Weathered pine logs, a stone chimney that's held together more by grit than mortar. But it's got something more valuable than polish, it's got history. The walls are lined with faded photos of Morrison men and their day, Grandpa in his old army jacket, Dad with his thick 70s sideburns, and me, just a scrawny teen proudly holding my facebuck. When the wind whistles through the gaps in those logs, it sounds like the voices of the past. And I swear, sometimes it still smells like Grandpa's pipe tobacco, especially on cold November mornings. My son Tyler, he's 16 now, comes out here every other weekend. He's got more tech know-how in his pinky than I've had in my whole life, but put a rifle in his hands and you can see it. He's a Morrison through and through. The divorce was tough on both of us, but this land, it's where we reconnect. It's where we remember who we are. Then came Meadowbrick Estates. Sprouted up like mushrooms around my property in 2018. 4 to 7 cookie-cutter homes, priced anywhere from $450,000 to $650,000. Most of the neighbors are decent folks, commute to the city, wave hello, mow their lawns, live and let live. And then there's Margaret Whitmore. She moved in from California about 6 years ago and snapped up the biggest house in the development, a beige monstrosity that looks like a cardboard box pretending to be architecture. She's 52, works in real estate, and somehow has been HOA board president for 8 years straight. Always in those quilted vests that scream, I shop at places with names like Countryside Manor, with manicured nails tapping on her clipboard like she's conducting a symphony of suburban control. She talks about elevating property values and modernizing the community. Translation: flattening everything that has character so the neighborhood can look like a page from a lifestyle magazine. I should have known trouble was coming when she stopped by for her welcome to the neighborhood visit. It was 3 months after I inherited the land. She stood in my driveway, her overpowering perfume battling the scent of hay and motor oil from my shop, eyeing my cabin like a general plotting an invasion. That old cabin really brings down everyone's property values, she said, skipping small talk entirely. I kept my tone steady. That cabin was here before your subdivision was even a twinkle in some developer's eye. Her smile didn't even try to reach her eyes. Well, she said, we'll see about that. The HOA has certain standards to maintain, she said, pausing like she just dropped the final word in a courtroom drama. The silence stretched, thick as smoke from a backfire. I'm sure a reasonable man like yourself understands the importance of community harmony. Community harmony, here? What she really meant was conformity. What she meant was control. As I watched her strut back down my gravel driveway, those absurd designer heels clicking like a metronome of menace, I had no clue she was already plotting her first move. No idea that in her mind, my 40 acres weren't a family legacy, They were just a parcel waiting to be managed, contained, and eventually acquired. What I was about to learn, real fast, was that Margaret Whitmore didn't just want to elevate property values. She wanted to own them. Her opening shot came 2 weeks later, delivered with all the fanfare of a formal declaration of war. Official HOA letterhead, legal-sized envelope, the whole 9 yards. I opened it right there beside the mailbox, and I swear I could hear her smug satisfaction crackling off the page like static electricity. Dear Mr. Morrison, after careful review, the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association has determined that the structure commonly referred to as your hunting cabin constitutes a non-conforming architectural violation under Section 4.7 of our community covenants. Non-conforming architectural violation. $20 words for we don't like your cabin. The letter demanded the cabin's removal within 30 days, with a warning that fines of $100 per day would begin immediately thereafter. Her signature, looped and swooping, sat at the bottom like a buzzard circling over roadkill. And the kicker, a footnote that read, all properties within Meadowbrook Estates must maintain aesthetic harmony consistent with modern residential standards. I'll admit it, I saw red. For a solid 30 seconds, I was ready to light that letter on fire and march it back to her doorstep. But then I remembered what Grandpa always said. When someone's trying to buffalo you, you better know the lay of the land first. That Saturday, Tyler and I headed to the county courthouse. Nothing clears your head quite like the whir of microfiche machines and the rustling of decades-old land records. To my surprise, Tyler was into it. Adjusting his glasses as he scrolled through dusty documents, he looked over at me and grinned. "Dad," he said, "this is like being a detective, but for real estate." What we found? Legal gold. Turns out, my property had never, and I mean never, been included in the HOA's jurisdiction. The original boundary surveys were crystal clear. Grandpa's land was specifically excluded from the development agreement. But here's where things got interesting. There was a note dated 2019 referencing a proposed boundary adjustment. It had been voted on at an HOA meeting, but never officially recorded with the county. The move was sketchy at best. That's when I decided it was time to talk to the real local authority, Mrs. Patterson. She lived in the first house ever built in Meadowbrook, right on the corner of Meadow and Pine. Sharp as a tack and tough as saddle leather, even in her 80s. Her memory, elephant level. Her records, meticulously filed in mismatched folders dating back to Reagan. When I knocked, she welcomed me in with a warm smile and poured a cup of coffee strong enough to peel the paint off a truck bed. "Oh, honey," she said, settling into her chair. Margaret rammed that boundary change through when half the neighborhood was off on summer vacation. Called it a technical correction to include some properties that had been, what did she say, accidentally overlooked. She made air quotes with her arthritic fingers, winking like she knew exactly what kind of woman Margaret really was. Most folks didn't even know what they were voting on. That's what Mrs. Patterson told me, and armed with that truth, I decided it was time to confront the HOA directly. Tyler came along, phone in hand, because, in his words, "Dad, if this lady's as unhinged as you say, someone's got to record it." The HOA meeting was held in Margaret's living room. First red flag right there. Picture about 20 people packed into a space meant for candlelit dinner parties, all squeezed onto those awful metal folding chairs that screech like tortured brakes every time someone shifts. Margaret sat perched at the front like some suburban monarch on her throne, clipboard in hand, ruling her kingdom of cul-de-sacs and compliance. When it came time for new business, I stood up and asked, politely, to address a concern. I laid out the original survey maps on her polished coffee table, the crisp paper crackling against the glass like a challenge. These documents clearly show that my property was never included in the HOA's jurisdiction, I said, keeping my tone even. I'd like to know on what legal basis you're claiming any authority over land that predates your development. Margaret's reply, pure dismissive arrogance. "Mr. Morrison," she said with a tone like I'd tracked mud onto her white carpet, "those outdated documents are irrelevant. We have updated community standards that apply to everyone in our neighborhood." She waved her hand like she was brushing away a gnat. "I'm sure you understand. We can't make exceptions just because someone thinks their land is special." Now, this is where I should have smiled, nodded, and walked away. But I didn't. I pressed. Then show me the legal document, I said, that gives you jurisdiction over my land. For just a flicker of a second, the fake smile slipped, and beneath it, I caught a glimpse of something cold, sharp, and calculating. Mr. Morrison, she said, voice like ice, I think you'll find we're fully prepared to pursue all legal remedies to enforce community standards. The room went dead silent. Even Tyler looked up from his phone, sensing the sudden chill in the air. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. It's a promise, she replied, the smile sliding back into place like a mask. Then she dropped her first real bombshell. She'd already filed formal complaints with the County Code Enforcement Office, accusing me of creating noise pollution and public safety hazards through my hunting activities. She even held up a petition, supposedly signed by concerned neighbors, though I recognized only 5 names out of the 47 homes in the subdivision. Her ultimatum was as clear as it was bold. Cease all hunting activities immediately, or face escalating enforcement action. As Tyler and I walked out of that room, him filming Margaret's smug expression as we left, I knew without a doubt that this had nothing to do with property values or noise ordinances. This was about power, and Margaret Whitmore had just made the mistake of trying to wield hers against the wrong man. She didn't waste time making good on her threats. Within a week, County Code Enforcement officers were at my door, clipboards in hand, grim expressions on their faces. Turns out Margaret had friends in high places. Her real estate firm had apparently helped a few City Hall folks find their dream homes at prices that raised more than a few eyebrows. The violations they cited were creative, I'll give them that. Alleged septic system deficiencies, for a cabin that had run without issue for over 70 years. Claims of unsafe hunting practices, despite my spotless record with state wildlife officers. Anonymous complaints about excessive noise, coincidentally filed only during my hunting trips. But Margaret's masterpiece, a glossy, full-color flyer campaign straight out of a propaganda playbook. Every mailbox in Meadowbrick Estates received a handout titled, Protecting Our Property Values, The Hidden Costs of Non-Conforming Land Use, complete with stock photos of frowning families, bullet point warnings about potential equity losses, and dramatic talk about incompatible rural activities. It read like a public service announcement but stank of personal vendetta. Then came the sabotage. Opening day of hunting season, I walked out to my truck to find all 4 tires slashed, clean cuts, surgical precision. This wasn't some punk kid with a pocket knife. This was someone with tools, and the stomach for vandalism. While I was on the phone with AAA, Tyler wandered off along the edge of the property, only to come back red-faced with fury. Dad, he said, you need to see this. Brand new no hunting signs had been posted all along our property line, complete with official-looking language and citations referencing municipal ordinances. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make them look real. Only one problem. This was our land. The crack of my boots on the frozen ground echoed like gunshots in the still morning air as I yanked those phony signs out of my dirt. Each metal stake came loose with a sharp clang, and I tossed them into the bed of my truck, evidence in a case that hadn't officially started, but was damn sure building. Later that day, I caught Margaret in her driveway, unloading organic kale and artisan cheese from the back of her spotless white SUV. I didn't wait. Care to explain the signs? I asked. She barely glanced at me. Her face was all innocence, an Oscar-worthy performance. I wouldn't know anything about that, Mr. Morrison, she said coolly, tucking a bundle of arugula into her reusable tote. Perhaps someone in the community is just trying to prevent accidents. Right. Someone with access to professional-grade signage and a detailed knowledge of exactly where to place them for maximum effect. That's when Tyler's Gen Z instincts kicked in for real. After the tire-slashing incident, he'd quietly set up security cameras, just trail cams we repositioned to watch the barn, house, and a good chunk of the property. And what we captured? Solid gold. Crystal clear footage of Margaret's landscaping crew placing those signs on our property. 2:17 p.m. Tuesday. Timestamped. Tyler enhanced the video on his laptop, zoomed in on license plates, cleaned up the image. Dad, he said, grinning like he'd cracked the Kennedy assassination. We've got her. Dead to rights. But Margaret wasn't just crafty, she was ruthless. By the time I brought the footage to the sheriff, She'd already filed a complaint of her own. Claimed I was harassing her landscaping crew and trespassing to install unauthorized surveillance equipment. Her version painted me as a paranoid, aggressive neighbor escalating a minor disagreement into a full-blown threat. Meanwhile, my legal bills were piling up, $15,000 and counting, just to defend my right to exist on my own land. That's when it hit me. Margaret wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to outspend me into surrender. It was the HOA's bottomless legal fund versus my personal checking account. But if she thought I was going down easy, she picked the wrong damn Morrison. I hired my own surveyor. Full service. Cart admissible. Professional grade. Cost me another $3,000 I didn't really have, but what he uncovered was worth every single penny. Turns out Margaret's beloved fence, the one protecting her immaculate, award-winning garden, was 15 feet onto my property. A full quarter-acre of land that had belonged to my grandfather was being used to grow her prized roses and that ridiculous topiary maze she bragged about in every HOA newsletter. I stood there in the pale morning light, gripping fresh survey stakes with calloused hands, and let myself smile for the first time in weeks. Margaret had been so obsessed with attacking my cabin that she'd forgotten to check her own backyard. I filed an official trespassing complaint and demanded the immediate removal of the fence. The reaction? Pure panic. Her carefully curated garden, the one featured in Better Homes and Gardens, was suddenly facing destruction. Her backyard paradise was about to become a construction zone. And that's when she made her first real mistake. She tried to buy me out. Offered $50,000 for the land she was squatting on, less than half of what any appraiser would have said it was worth. Think about it, she told me during an uninvited negotiation on the sidewalk between our properties. You could take the money, relocate somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle. Her desperation clung to her stronger than that cloying perfume she drowned herself in. I looked her straight in the eye and said, Margaret, my lifestyle was here long before you ever showed up, and it'll be here long after you're gone. That's when she went nuclear. A few weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit thick enough to stop a bullet. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, filed by some hotshot Denver attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. According to the suit, my legal hunting activities were causing Margaret and several of her supporters severe psychological trauma and making them fear for their children's safety. Not kidding. In the complaint, they compared the sound of gunfire during state-approved hunting hours on private land to living in a war zone. Never mind that hunting season lasted exactly 2 weeks, or that I'd never fired a shot anywhere near the subdivision. In Margaret's version of reality, I was some kind of backwoods menace, terrorizing innocent suburbanites with my dangerous rural lifestyle. She wasn't just filing complaints anymore, she was petitioning the court for a restraining order that would ban all hunting on my land. If she succeeded, a judge's pen would wipe out 70 years of family tradition in one fell swoop. The local news picked up the story, of course. Hunter versus HOA, when rural traditions clash with suburban growth. Channel 7 ran a segment that made me look like some relic from a bygone era, stubborn, outdated, unwilling to adjust to modern living. Margaret, naturally, delivered a quote fit for a press release. We're simply trying to protect our children from dangerous activities that have no place in a modern residential community. But here's where her overconfidence started to backfire. The lawsuit required her to provide detailed documentation of each alleged incident. And that's when Tyler, bless his methodical teenage brain, kicked into high gear. He began cross-referencing her claims with our security footage, hunting logs, and even the cellular timestamps from his trailcam cloud backups. What we uncovered, a pattern that would have made any prosecutor grin. Margaret had been calling the police with false reports during my legal hunting hours, claiming shots were fired toward her home, even when footage showed I was facing the opposite direction. She filed noise complaints for days I wasn't even on the property. She even alleged threatening behavior during encounters that Tyler had recorded, footage showing me being nothing but calm, polite, and professional. The court hearings turned into a three-ring circus. Margaret arrived flanked by her little circle of loyalists, the same 5 who'd signed her original petition, now joined by a few awkward-looking neighbors who clearly regretted being dragged into it. I came with Tyler, Mrs. Patterson, and a steadily growing crowd of community members who had started seeing through Margaret's paper-thin facade. One hearing in particular stood out. Margaret's attorney proudly slammed a thick binder onto the table. "Evidence," she said with emphasis. Inside were dozens of photographs of my property, all taken from Margaret's second-story window using a telephoto lens. One picture showed me cleaning my rifle on my own back porch. Another showed Tyler and me unloading gear from the truck. The invasive nature of her surveillance started creeping out even her own supporters. The judge raised an eyebrow. Even Margaret's attorney looked uncomfortable presenting it. And just when I thought it couldn't get dirtier, it did. Suddenly, anonymous complaints were being sent to the state wildlife office, accusing me of baiting deer illegally, completely fabricated. Around the same time, fake social media profiles started circulating nasty rumors about my mental health and supposed threats against neighbors. Margaret's real estate friends began quietly pressuring other homeowners, suggesting that if they didn't support the HOA's position, their property values might suffer. Whisper campaigns, veiled threats, and then there was the fire. It started with Tyler one evening, standing by the barn, watching a plume of thick, acrid smoke rise over Margaret's privacy fence. "That's not leaf smoke," he said. "That's plastic and ink. Someone's burning paper." Sure enough, Margaret had taken to burning documents in her backyard fire pit every other evening. We didn't need to see what she was torching. We knew. She was destroying evidence. Meanwhile, my world was unraveling. Tyler started asking to stay with his mom more often. Said things were getting weird. He wasn't wrong. The pressure was turning my home into a war zone, and not the kind you can fix with sandbags and grit. Work became my only escape, but even that started slipping. I'd forget simple tasks, space out in meetings. My foreman pulled me aside one day and asked if I needed time off. I told him no. I couldn't afford to stop moving, because when I stopped, the anxiety caught up. Sleep! That became a rare luxury. It's hard to rest when you don't know what fresh hell the morning mail will bring. And the neighborhood split right down the middle. Some folks were genuinely rattled by Margaret's fearmongering. Others, more and more of them, were beginning to resent her rigid, authoritarian grip on every aspect of their lives, from lawn height to holiday lights. The quiet cul-de-sac harmony she claimed to protect was cracking at the seams. And the battle was far from over. Mrs. Patterson had become my unofficial intelligence network, keeping tabs on how the winds of neighborhood opinion were shifting. But it was Tyler's school project that unexpectedly turned the tide. What started as a simple civics report on local government structures had evolved into a full-blown investigation into HOA abuse of power, and what Tyler uncovered went far beyond just our case. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Margaret had been targeting. The Millers were being cited for their non-conforming garden shed. The Johnsons got violation notices for parking their work truck in their own driveway. Dave Martinez was facing daily fines over a basketball hoop his kids had put up. One by one, Margaret had been cracking down on anything that didn't fit her magazine-perfect vision of neighborhood life. To Margaret, community standards didn't mean safety or order. They meant conformity, erasing anything that showed real families actually lived in these homes. But then came the discovery that changed everything. While researching Margaret's background for his project, Tyler stumbled across old newspaper articles from her previous neighborhood back in California. Same tactics, same pattern, same results. She targeted homeowners there too, hitting them with petty violations, legal pressure, and harassment until they sold. And somehow, like clockwork, those properties ended up flipped for huge profits by real estate companies linked to her network. "Dad," Tyler said, spinning his laptop around so I could see the screen, "she's not trying to fix this neighborhood, she's trying to own it." That's when it all clicked. This wasn't just about compliance. This was about acquisition. A real estate con dressed up as community management. And my 40 acres, they weren't just an eyesore in her plan, they were the prize. The breakthrough came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night, courtesy of Tyler's insomnia, his caffeine habit, and his obsession with legal databases. I found him in the kitchen, surrounded by empty energy drink cans, his laptop glowing in the dark like a campfire. He looked up with wide eyes, his voice a mix of excitement and pure exhaustion. "Dad, you need to see this." What he showed me was a legal bombshell, one that could bring down Margaret's entire house of cards. The HOA, Margaret's beloved instrument of control, It had never been legally incorporated under Colorado state law. Not even close. Tyler had spent hours comparing the state's required filing documents with what Margaret had submitted over the years. The smoking gun was right there in black and white, missing signatures, no official articles of incorporation, no state certification. According to Colorado law, if an HOA isn't properly registered and certified, it has zero legal authority. No power to enforce covenants. No power to issue fines. No power to do anything. And Margaret's HOA? It had never been more than a glorified neighborhood club. White have a checkmark legal nugget. In Colorado, every HOA must file official articles of incorporation with the state, along with proper bylaws, board elections, and financial disclosures. If those documents aren't filed and certified, the HOA has no more power than a bake sale committee. The implications hit me like a truck. Margaret had been illegally collecting dues from 47 families for 4 straight years. That's over $200,000 in unregulated funds. No oversight. No proper accounting. No authority. The kitchen printer hummed under the stack of evidence we were compiling. Paper after paper rolled out like whispers from the past, secrets finally coming into the light. Tyler, my 16-year-old son, had basically become a forensic accountant overnight. He tracked payments, found inconsistencies, and flagged suspicious contractor payments that never matched real work being done. It was a kind of audit that would make any IRS agent sit up straighter. But the real gut punch came the next morning. Mrs. Patterson showed up on my porch with a manila envelope and a look that said she'd been holding this back for just the right moment. Inside, documents that painted an even darker picture. Turns out, Margaret's real estate firm had secretly been representing developers looking to build a shopping center on the other side of the county, right next to our neighborhood. She came to see me 3 months ago, Mrs. Patterson said, her hands trembling around the steaming mug of coffee I'd brewed strong enough to wake the dead. Asked if I'd be willing to sell. Told me property values were going to change dramatically in the near future. Suddenly, it all made sense. The fake fines, the harassment, the flyers, the lawsuits, the manipulation. Margaret wasn't just trying to elevate property values. She was trying to crash them, then swoop in and buy cheap before development raised them through the roof. And my 40 acres, they weren't in her way. They were the cornerstone of the whole operation. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes during an earthquake. Tyler's research had uncovered the real prize. My grandfather's land didn't just carry sentimental value. It was sitting on valuable gravel deposits. And the real kicker, water rights, in drought-prone Colorado, that made the land more valuable than anything above it. Margaret wasn't trying to eliminate a hunting cabin. She was engineering the acquisition of the most valuable undeveloped land in the county, planning to flip it to developers for millions. The shopping center proposal. It would make my land the crown jewel of the entire project. And Margaret had positioned herself to cash in on both ends of the deal. The conflict of interest was beyond staggering. As HOA president, she had used her fake authority to manipulate property values and pressure longtime residents into selling. As a real estate agent, she was secretly working with developers who needed my family's land. And since her HOA was never legally incorporated, the entire thing was a front, a fraud dressed in community concern. Tyler handed me the final piece of the puzzle. A letter from Mountain Vista Development, expressing formal interest in acquiring the Morrison tract for commercial purposes. This was never about hunting, Tyler said, his voice tight. It was never about the cabin. She's been planning to steal our land since day one. The smell of fresh coffee couldn't mask the bitterness in my mouth. Margaret Whitmore wasn't just a power-hungry bureaucrat with a clipboard. She was a con artist orchestrating a long-term scam to steal family land, and our legacy was her biggest target. But now that I knew the rules of her game, it was time to change them. My kitchen table became War Room Central, and the crew I assembled around it would have made any general proud. First up, Sarah Chen, my attorney. Turns out she specialized in HOA law and had been waiting her entire career for a case this juicy. Jake, she said, spreading out legal documents like battle plans across the table. This isn't just civil fraud. This is criminal. Collecting dues under false authority. That's theft. Plain and simple. Tyler took point on documentation. His laptop hummed day and night as he sorted through 4 years' worth of emails, letters, and surveillance footage, building a digital case that could make a prosecutor cry with gratitude. Mrs. Patterson became our community's intelligence network. Her decades of neighborhood gossip, now repurposed as intel gathering, helped us track down more victims of Margaret's tactics. Dave Miller, the guy with the non-conforming work truck from the corner lot, brought in construction expertise and a no-nonsense understanding of how development deals actually work. But our secret weapon, Maria Santos, a CPA who lived 3 streets over. She had forensic accounting skills that could trace a nickel through a money laundering ring. And she wasn't about to let someone like Margaret pull the wool over the eyes of her neighborhood. Once Sarah filed our civil suit, we got access to the HOA's books through legal discovery. What Maria uncovered made my blood run cold. She laid the documents across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces from a financial crime scene. The smooth feel of bank statements beneath my hands told the story of systematic embezzlement, the kind that would have made Al Capone pause and take notes. Margaret had been paying herself a management fee with no board approval, charging consulting expenses to shell companies she secretly owned, billing the HOA for landscaping her own yard, claiming it was community beautification. Everything was fake. The power, the fines, the signatures, the standards, and most damning of all, the money trail. Margaret hadn't just tried to take my cabin. She tried to take my heritage, my son's future, and the soul of this community. Now, she was about to find out what happened when a woman like her picked a fight with a family like mine and thought she could win. Margaret had turned neighborhood dues into her own personal piggy bank. Knowledge nugget. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to the community. Misusing funds that can lead to personal liability up to triple damages, not to mention criminal charges for fraud and theft. But the real goldmine wasn't in the ledger, it was buried in the dirt. Tyler's deep dive into county records, fueled by energy drinks and aided by Mrs. Patterson's encyclopedic memory, turned up something huge. Those two had become a formidable team. Teenage tech wizard meets old-school research librarian. What they found changed everything. My grandfather's original deed included water rights. Not just any rights, historic allocations that predated every other claim in the area by 50 years. In drought-prone Colorado, that made them worth more than the land itself. Dad, Tyler said, his voice taut with excitement, Margaret's developers need our water to make their shopping center viable. Without it, the whole project's dead in the water. Literally. It hit me like a revelation. I didn't need to fight the development. I needed to control it. Dave Miller's construction background helped fill in the rest. Any serious development in the area would require access roads, and those roads would have to cross my land. Margaret's developers didn't just need my compliance, they needed my signature to build anything at all. Sarah, our legal general, laid out the strategy like a chess master lining up a checkmate. We hit them from all sides, she said. Criminal referrals for the theft, civil suits for damages and recovery, injunctions to freeze all HOA assets while the investigation's underway. Knowledge nugget, an HOA that isn't properly incorporated has zero legal authority. That means every fine they issued, void. Every dollar they collected, recoverable, with interest. The community phase. It all started with a simple invitation. Neighborhood truth session at Morrison Place. Come see what we're really fighting for. I fired up the old stone fire pit behind the cabin, put on a pot of coffee strong enough to melt rust, and waited. One by one, they came. 32 neighbors in total, some curious, some angry, most just exhausted by the drama. But all of them ready to hear the truth. The sound of car tires on gravel had never felt so good. Story after story poured out. Margaret had been targeting everyone, not just me. If your house, car, or hobbies didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection, you got a violation. Or a threat. Or worse. Mrs. Patterson presented the timeline like a seasoned historian. Maria broke down the HOA's financial fraud in plain English. Sarah explained everyone's legal rights. And Tyler, my brilliant, sleep-deprived son, unveiled a digital presentation that made everyone's jaw drop. But the real turning point came when Dave Miller stood up by the fire, there was smoke curling around his face like war paint. Margaret picked the wrong neighborhood to mess with. Cheers broke out. The energy shifted. The publicity war. Tyler took the lead again, launching a full-on media blitz. "Dad," he said, grinning in the firelight, "you don't beat bullies in the dark. You beat them in broad daylight, with facts, proof, and a megaphone." We hit social media first, videos, interviews, even drone footage showing the illegal fence encroaching on our land. Channel 7 followed up their original hit piece with a new segment, HOA President Accused of Fraud. Within days, Margaret was in full-blown damage control mode, calling neighbors, spinning stories, offering hush money settlements. But it was too late. The truth was out. Then came her final, desperate move. She tried to fast-track the shopping center project, hoping to cash out before the criminal investigation could take her down. Too bad for Margaret. We were already 3 moves ahead. The briefcase. It happened the morning after our community meeting. 6 a.m. sharp. Margaret showed up on my porch in a designer trench coat, hair immaculate, heels clicking like a metronome of menace. In her hand was a leather briefcase. Inside, $100,000 in cash. Neatly rubber-banded stacks of hundreds. It looked like something out of a mob movie. "This is yours," she said, her tone icy calm. "Sign the settlement agreement, walk away from the lawsuit, and everyone goes home happy." I stood there in my work clothes, a chipped coffee mug in one hand, staring at more money than I'd ever seen in one place. I'll admit it. I thought about it. For about 3 seconds. Then I remember the look on Tyler's face when he realized what Margaret had done, not just to us, but to our neighbors. And I remembered Grandpa's words. "There's no price on doing right by your people." "Margaret," I said, setting my mug down on the porch rail, "you can't buy your way out of theft charges." Her composure cracked like thin ice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Morrison. I have connections. I have resources. I can make your life very, very difficult." And she tried. Oh, did she try? The sabotage campaign escalated to levels that would make a paranoid dictator proud. My water well, the one that had supplied clean water to 3 generations of Morrisons, was suddenly contaminated with diesel fuel. Tests confirmed it was an accidental runoff. Someone had deliberately poured petroleum down the well casing. Then my hunting gear started disappearing from the locked barn, rifle scope, calls, even my grandfather's vintage hunting knife that had been in the family for 60 years. Each theft was small enough to avoid major police scrutiny but loud enough to send a message. Margaret could reach me anywhere, anytime. Tyler's security cameras captured some interesting late-night visitors, specifically, Margaret's landscaping crew conducting what they thought were covert operations. The crunch of footsteps outside my cabin at 2 a.m. became a regular soundtrack, like having my own personal stalking orchestra. But Margaret's real mistake was dragging politics into it. She'd spent years cozying up to city council members. Now, she was cashing in those favors. Suddenly, I was facing a parade of safety inspections that would make a Soviet bureaucrat blush. The building inspector who showed up to examine my 70-year-old cabin acted like he was investigating a nuclear waste site. Every board, every nail, every inch of wiring got scrutinized with the kind of care usually reserved for spacecraft. The cabin that had weathered decades of Colorado winters was suddenly a public safety hazard, requiring immediate remediation. Code enforcement became Margaret's personal harassment tool. Parking violations for my truck being 6 inches over the property line. Noise ordinance violations for using my chainsaw at 11 a.m. on a Saturday. Even a citation for improper firewood storage, because my woodpile wasn't aesthetically consistent with community standards. Margaret's fierce, relentless presence became the neighborhood's new scent, like a perfume of sweat and bitterness whenever we crossed paths. Her usual confidence was cracking under pressure from multiple investigations. She was making desperate, increasingly reckless moves to discredit me before the whole house of cards collapsed. Her smear campaign went digital and viral. Anonymous social media accounts started spreading rumors about my dangerous past and supposed threats against families. Fake reviews appeared on my employer's website, claiming I was unstable and unfit to operate heavy machinery. She even tried to get me fired, calling my supervisor with stories about erratic behavior and potential violence. Whispers in PTA meetings, grocery aisles, and church pews painted me as some unhinged mountain man terrorizing suburban families. Margaret's talent for manipulation was impressive. She could make herself the victim in any scenario, no matter how overwhelming the evidence against her. But Tyler's digital forensics were paying off. That kid had turned into a one-man CSI unit, recovering deleted emails from Margaret's real estate website, tracing the IP addresses of anonymous social accounts back to her home office. The private investigator I hired, a former Denver cop named Rodriguez, captured Margaret's bribery attempt on audio and video, offering cash to make criminal charges vanish. That's its own crime. Obstruction of justice joined her growing list of legal nightmares. Meanwhile, my allies weren't immune. They faced their own waves of pressure, intimidation, and smear campaigns. Mrs. Patterson started getting threatening phone calls, thinly veiled warnings about accidents that happen to elderly residents who don't mind their own business. Dave Miller's contractor license suddenly came under review by the state board. Maria faced an IRS audit, coincidentally conducted by an agent who just happened to be Margaret's real estate friend's brother-in-law. The pattern was unmistakable. Margaret wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was waging war against anyone who dared to challenge her authority. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd united the entire neighborhood against her. In an ironic twist, Margaret's escalation exposed her web of corruption throughout local government, giving us evidence of a conspiracy far bigger than HOA fraud. Margaret's final desperate gambit was a masterclass in manipulation and political theater. She called an emergency HOA meeting, her last chance to control the narrative before everything came crashing down. The invitation was hand-delivered to every house in Meadow Brick Estates, dripping with dramatic language about addressing the crisis threatening our community. Her opening presentation was pure propaganda, polished to a mirror-perfect shine. PowerPoint slides filled with cherry-picked statistics about property value declines. Photos of my property, snapped with telephoto lenses to make everything look dilapidated. Testimonials from concerned families fearing for their children's safety. But the cracks in Margaret's usual flawless facade were impossible to hide. Her hair was slightly mussed, makeup heavier than usual to cover stress lines, and that false smile couldn't quite reach her eyes. She looked like someone desperately clinging to control by her perfectly manicured fingernails. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, gesturing dramatically at a blown-up photo of my hunting cabin, "we cannot allow one individual's selfish agenda to destroy the community we've all worked so hard to build." Her narrative painted me as mentally unstable, a dangerous relic from the past, too stubborn to adapt to modern community standards. She produced letters of support from city officials, the very ones she'd been cultivating for years, and implied that my resistance to reasonable regulations was somehow unpatriotic. That's when she made her biggest mistake. In her desperation to discredit me, Margaret started making specific accusations, claims of threatening behavior and intimidation against neighbors. The problem? Tyler had been documenting every interaction for months. Her accusations were provably false. The moment Margaret finished her presentation, the mood in the room shifted like a thunderstorm rolling in. Mrs. Patterson, sweet, quiet Mrs. Patterson, who'd never raised her voice in 70 years, stood up from her folding chair with the dignity of someone who'd finally had enough. "Margaret," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the silent room, "I have lived in this neighborhood longer than anyone here, and I have never seen anything as dishonest as what you just presented." What followed was testimony that dismantled Margaret's credibility piece by piece. Mrs. Patterson described the pressure tactics, the attempted property purchases, the threats aimed at elderly residents who didn't cooperate. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she read from notes she'd been keeping for months, but her voice never wavered. Dave Miller stood next, his quiet confidence the kind that comes from a lifetime of working with his hands. "Margaret offered me $50,000 to lie about Jake in court," he announced, his words dropping into the room like heavy stones in still water. "When I refused, she threatened to have my contractor's license revoked." The dominoes began to fall faster than Margaret could stop them. Family after family rose to share stories of harassment, financial pressure, and intimidation. The community she thought she controlled was turning against her in real time. But Margaret wasn't finished. In a move that revealed just how detached from reality she'd become, she doubled down on her accusations. She claimed the testimonies were coordinated lies, conspirators trying to destroy legitimate community governance. That's when Tyler made his move. My brilliant, Tech-savvy son had been quietly setting up his laptop at the back of the room, and now he was ready. The deleted emails appeared on the projection screen in all their incriminating glory. Margaret's own words, recovered from her real estate website server, laid out her entire scheme in black and white. The room watched in stunned silence as email after email revealed her plans: eliminate the hunting cabin problem, pressure homeowners to sell, and profit from fast sales to developers. The smoking gun, an email thread with Mountain Vista Development detailing financial projections. Margaret's cut from forcing my family off our land: $3,200,000. She wasn't just facilitating the shopping center, she was a full partner in the scam. Margaret's composure shattered completely. "This is all fake," she screamed, voice cracking with desperation. "They hacked my computer. They're trying to frame me." But the evidence was overwhelming. Everyone in the room saw it. The woman who'd claimed to be a guardian of community values was exposed as a con artist running an elaborate real estate fraud. In a stunning twist, the emergency meeting Margaret called to destroy my credibility became the very public forum where her crimes were laid bare. And law enforcement was already on its way, based on Tyler's evidence. The sound of sirens in the distance wasn't coincidence. Detective Rodriguez had been waiting in the parking lot for exactly this moment. The Meadowbrook Community Center had never seen anything like what happened next. What began as Margaret's last-ditch effort to control the narrative turned into the most dramatic public downfall our county had seen in years. Channel 7 was there to broadcast every excruciating second live. Detective Rodriguez entered through the back doors just as Margaret was screaming about conspiracies and fake evidence. The metallic click of his badge against the doorframe cut through her protests like a knife through butter. Behind him came two officers and a very official-looking woman from the district attorney's office, who had been building the case for weeks. The room fell deathly silent. You could hear a pin drop on the institutional carpeting as Rodriguez walked down the center aisle, warrant in hand, camera crews tracking his every step. "Margaret Whitmore," he announced, voice heavy with months of investigation. "You under arrest for fraud, theft, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Margaret's face cycled through 6 shades of pale before settling on a sickly green that would have made a chameleon jealous. Her perfectly constructed facade crumbled in real time as the handcuffs clicked on. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked, voice cracking with desperation. "You're all sheep. You don't know what you're doing." But the community she'd terrorized for years wasn't buying it anymore. As Rodriguez read her rights, spontaneous applause erupted. 47 families finally watching justice served, wrapped in a layer of public humiliation. Tyler filmed everything on his phone, but he didn't have to. Channel 7's cameras had already captured every moment for the evening news. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Martinez, was already crafting the sound bites that would make this story go viral by morning. But the real MIC drop moment came when Sarah Chen stepped forward, clutching a folder thick enough to choke a horse. The civil lawsuit we'd filed was just the beginning. Inside that folder were criminal referrals, federal charges for mail fraud, and enough evidence to put Margaret away for years. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah announced, her lawyer voice cutting through the chaos, "has systematically defrauded this community of over $200,000 in illegal dues, used her position to pressure families into selling their homes, and conspired with developers to profit from forced property sales." She held up a document that made Margaret's already pale face go completely white. This morning, federal agents seized all assets related to her real estate firm. Every penny she stole will be returned to the community with interest. The final walk was something to behold. Margaret, who'd spent years strutting through the neighborhood like she owned it, was now being escorted out in handcuffs while news cameras rolled. Her designer heels clicked against the linoleum floor with the rhythm of a death march. That expensive quilted vest looked pretty ridiculous next to the silver bracelets decorating her wrists. The media circus outside was intense. Jessica Martinez thrust a microphone toward Margaret as she was loaded into the police car, asking pointed questions about the fraud scheme and the family she'd victimized. Margaret's only response was to hide her face and mutter something about getting the best lawyers money can buy. Tyler grabbed the MIC opportunity like the social media-savvy teenager he was. "My dad taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies," he told the camera, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. Margaret thought she could steal our family's land and get away with it. She was wrong. My own interview was shorter but more pointed. This was never about hunting regulations or property values, I said, looking straight into the camera. This was about one woman's greed and her willingness to destroy a community to feed it. The crowd began chanting, "No joke, justice for Jake," like it was some kind of sporting event. Mrs. Patterson wiped tears of joy from her eyes. Her real estate license permanently revoked. Her developer connections mysteriously unavailable for comment. Best of all, she slunk back to California with her tail between her legs, probably warning everyone she met about crazy mountain people who don't appreciate good governance. Meanwhile, Meadow Brook Estates was healing faster than anyone expected. Mrs. Patterson got elected as the vice president of our properly incorporated HOA. Turns out, when you actually file the paperwork correctly and follow the law, amazing things happen. Property values didn't just stabilize, they went up 15%. Thanks to what real estate agents started calling positive community spirit. Here's a knowledge nugget for you. Communities with transparent, legally compliant HOAs actually have higher property values than those run by petty tyrants. Buyers pay premium prices for functional neighborhoods. Dave Miller's construction company ended up getting hired for legitimate community improvements, new playground equipment, proper storm drainage, and a walking trail that connects all the neighborhoods. Funny how much you can accomplish when you're not spending all your time fighting corruption. My relationship with Tyler reached levels I'd never imagined possible. That kid had gone from weekend visitor to full partner in managing our family legacy. He'd learned more about standing up for what's right in 6 months than most people learn in a lifetime. Plus, his documentation skills earned him a scholarship to Colorado State's journalism program. Apparently, exposing real estate fraud looks great on college applications. The land development situation worked out better than I could have dreamed. Mountain Vista Development approached me directly after Margaret's arrest, offering a fair market deal for development rights. But instead of just selling out, we negotiated something unprecedented. Limited commercial development that preserved the hunting land and created a community benefit. The Morrison Family Conservation Fund became the crown jewel of our settlement. Half the development profits went into a trust that provides hunting safety courses for local youth, environmental education programs, and scholarships for rural students pursuing conservation careers. Tyler's Eagle Scout project, building an educational trail through the preserve, became the model for similar programs across the state. The old cabin got restored to its former glory and was designated a historical landmark. Now it serves as a living museum where 3 generations of Morrison hunting photos hang alongside new pictures of Tyler and me carrying on the tradition. The smell of wood smoke from that old stone chimney still mixes with the crisp scent of autumn leaves, just like when Grandpa was teaching me to track deer through these same woods. Our annual Morrison Family Hunting Heritage Festival draws families from across Colorado. Kids learn archery, just like I learned from my grandfather, while their parents swap stories about standing up to neighborhood bullies. It's become the kind of community event that Margaret's fake harmony could never have created. The ripple effects went way beyond our little neighborhood. Tyler's documentation methods became a template used by homeowner advocates across the country. Mrs. Patterson's activism helped push through state legislation requiring stronger financial oversight of HOA boards. The Channel 7 investigation sparked a statewide audit that uncovered similar fraud schemes in dozens of communities. I even got offered a book deal about how I beat the HOA bully. Turns out, there are a lot of people out there dealing with Margaret-style tyrants, and my story gave them hope that resistance is possible. But the moment that really summed everything up happened last Sunday evening. Tyler and I were sitting on the cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, when he looked over at me and said, "Dad, Grandpa would be proud of what we built here." And you know what? He was right. We'd taken Margaret's attempt to destroy our family legacy and turned it into something bigger and better than any of us had imagined. The sign at the entrance to our property says it all. Morrison Heritage Land Hunting and Community Welcome. Right below it, Tyler added a smaller sign that reads, "In memory of bullies everywhere, they always lose in the end." So, here's my message to all of you dealing with HOA nightmares. Document everything, know your rights, and never let petty tyrants convince you that their corruption is normal. And remember, sometimes the best way to win isn't just beating the bully. It's building something so good that everyone else wins, too. If you've got your own HOA horror story, drop it in the comments. We're not alone in this fight. And if this story helped you understand your rights or gave you hope for your own situation, smash that subscribe button, because bullies count on good people staying silent. And we're just getting started.